The message landed in Alina Voss's inbox at 4:52 on a Friday afternoon, timed with the kind of corporate precision that let its author vanish into weekend traffic before anyone could respond in anger. Subject line, RE, salary review deferred to next cycle, and beneath it, 3 paragraphs of hollow gratitude explaining that her requested adjustment had been tabled pending restructuring priorities. Signed by a junior HR coordinator named Nadia who had been with the company for all of 8 months. Alina was 38, the senior licensing counsel at Ironvale Dynamics, a biotech firm that had built its entire reputation on a soil enzyme patent she herself had drafted 6 years earlier in a cramped apartment fueled by instant noodles and stubborn ambition. She was the woman who read every clause nobody else bothered to understand, and she had just watched her 3rd consecutive raise evaporate into vague corporate language, while 2 cubicles away, a 26-year-old sales rep celebrated a bonus for a deal she'd quietly saved from collapsing months earlier. She closed her laptop without a word, walked past the celebratory cluster of coworkers popping Prosecco by the elevators, and felt something inside her shift from wounded to precise, the way a blade settles once it's finally been sharpened. That evening, alone in her apartment with her rescue greyhound curled against her feet, Alina pulled up the original licensing agreement between Solvex and Cortland Agritech, the $80 million deal that had transformed her employer from a struggling startup into an industry player almost overnight. Buried on page 38, in a royalty escalation clause she had inserted years earlier as a defensive measure against exactly this kind of corporate amnesia, was language statting that once Solvex's enzyme technology achieved sustained commercial deployment across a specified threshold of acreage, licensing revenue would shift to include a retroactive royalty payable directly to the clause's original drafting architect, a provision signed, notarized, and quietly forgotten by every executive who had joined the company since. She spent the weekend cross-referencing production reports with the diligence of someone building a case rather than settling a grudge, discovering that Cortland's Fields had crossed the threshold nearly 2 years earlier, and that Solvex's own quarterly earnings calls had bragged about exactly the metrics that triggered her forgotten clause. Rather than confronting anyone internally, she made a single phone call to Marcus Whitfield, Cortland's general counsel and an old professional rival she respected more than most of her own colleagues, and calmly informed him that his company might be operating under a license with an unresolved compliance gap that could expose them to liability if left unaddressed. Marcus, sharp enough to recognize opportunity dressed as a courtesy call, requested copies of the relevant clause and performance data by Monday morning, and within 48 hours, his firm had drafted a formal notice of audit addressed to Solvex's executive leadership, demanding proof that the royalty obligation had been satisfied. When the notice arrived at Solvex, it landed first on the desk of CEO Preston Ambrose, who barely skimmed it before forwarding it to CFO Derek Calloway with a one-line message calling it boilerplate legacy nonsense. And Derek, in turn, forwarded it straight to Alina herself, unknowingly asking the very person owed the money to investigate whether the money was owed. Alina replied with professional restraint, promising to review the historical documentation thoroughly, and then did precisely nothing beyond watching the clock, letting the 48-hour response window Cortland had specified tick past unanswered, while executives obsessed instead over an unrelated product launch. When the deadline lapsed, Cortland exercised its contractual right to suspend payment pending investigation, and by the following Monday's finance meeting, a junior analyst named Priya nervously flagged an unexplained liability entry on the books that CFO Derek ordered deleted on the spot, an act of willful concealment that Alina documented in real time from across the conference table. The following Monday, during Solvex's monthly all-hands meeting where Preston stood on stage praising the company's unstoppable trajectory, 2 process servers walked through the double doors flanked by Marcus Whitfield himself, silencing the room instantly as they handed Preston a thick legal filing citing breach of contract, unauthorized use of licensed intellectual property, and willful suppression of a known financial liability. Every head in the room turned toward the back of the crowd where Alina stood calmly in a charcoal blazer. And when Preston's eyes met hers, the color drained from his face as he finally understood exactly whose signature was buried on that decades-old clause. In the closed-door negotiation that followed, with lawyers from both companies flanking a table stacked with damning printouts, Alina laid out her terms without raising her voice. Immediate payment of all retroactive royalties with interest, a written acknowledgement of the company's compensation failures, and a new position as Director of Contract Integrity, reporting directly to the board rather than to the executives who had tried to bury her. Derek Calloway, sweating through his tailored shirt, attempted to argue the clause was outdated legal clutter, but Marcus reminded him coolly that Cortland was fully prepared to walk away from an $80 million partnership rather than continue funding a company that manipulated its own financial disclosures. Within a week, the settlement wire hit Alina's account for just over $460,000, a number that felt less like compensation and more like long overdue proof that she had never been as invisible as they assumed. Preston quietly stepped back into an advisory role at the board's insistence. Derek was escorted from the building carrying a cardboard box past the same elevators where his bonus celebrations once echoed, and Alina moved into a corner office where she immediately hired Priya as her first analyst, training her to flag every red cell without fear of being told to delete it. Months later, Alina received another email from HR, this time confirming her compensation package had been fully processed and approved by the board without complications, and she allowed herself a small, satisfied smile as she typed a 2-line reply thanking them and gently reminding them to file it correctly, since she wouldn't want it getting lost in legal again. The office culture shifted permanently in her wake, not because she demanded fear, but because everyone finally understood that the quiet woman who read the fine print had been holding the company's future in her hands the entire time, and no one made that mistake twice. If this story resonated with you, know that the real lesson isn't about revenge. It's about the quiet power of preparation, patience, and knowing your own worth long before anyone else does. Please subscribe to our channel and share this video with your friends and family. We create entertaining and inspiring stories for our viewers, and your support helps us continue making great content for you.